Tony Blair, remember him? He's joined fellow former Prime Minister John Major, who you probably can't remember, in condemning the latest season of The Crown. The new season depicts Charles trying to recruit Blair as an ally to try and oust his mother and pave the way for him to marry Camilla Parker Bowles, something that Blair has described as complete and utter rubbish. It follows John Major's description of a scene in which he's depicted trying to persuade the late Queen to abdicate as malicious nonsense. Well, with me now, I couldn't think of anyone better, is former BBC royal correspondent Michael Cole. Michael, I thank you very much for your time. If we consider the period being covered here by the Netflix series The Crown, around this time, you'll remember better than most, the media narrative was very much stacked against the monarch. Just how much of a risk was the institution placed in at that time?
Darren, you're right on target there, because this is Series 5. It starts on Wednesday, and it's focused on the 1990s. And the 1990s were a desperate decade for the royal family. 3 of the Queen's children divorced. Windsor Castle nearly burned to the ground in 1992. Scandal after scandal happened. Fergie had her toes sucked by an American financier in the south of France. Prince Charles' conversation with Mrs. Parker Bowles, in which he was expressing his carnal desires in very stark terms, a conversation that held him up to ridicule around the world. Diana gave an interview, which we all remember, in which she said in clear terms, "My husband is not fit to be king." And she also said there were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded. Now, these things haven't been invented by the Crown. These things really happened. They don't have to go looking for sensation because, as you intimated, it was a sensational, in the wrong sense for the royal family, decade. Of course, in the first 2 series of The Crown, 1 and 2, there was a very flattering portrait painted of the Queen.
Yes.
It couldn't have been more so, beautifully played by a very good actress called Claire Foy, and I'm sure we will remember that. Now, those 2 series were virtually an unpaid advertisement for a constitutional monarchy. You couldn't have bought that sort of publicity. Now, there were errors in that, and there were anachronisms, but nobody, not the usual subjects, started to denounce it, because actually it was good news for the royal family, because what was happening at that time was good news. Now, the program makers have to reflect what happened in that decade. And as I said, it was a dire decade, the 1990s.
Absolutely. So, Michael, would you be in support of, and some have been calling for this, a disclaimer on the Netflix series that says, look, this isn't real life, this isn't historic, immutable truth and fact, right? This is a drama.
I feel neutral about that because most people factor that in. Whenever they're watching something, they use their common sense. You don't abdicate your common sense when you're watching anything. But if you look at it in a rather broader sense, William Shakespeare wrote, I think, about 35, 37 plays. All but one of them was based upon a story that had been written, a historical story. Now, not one of those plays is historically accurate, reflecting what really happened, but do they reveal a higher truth? I think most people would say, even though the story of Richard III isn't historically accurate, they found some truth in it. Yes. Macbeth is not accurate. Do you find some truth in it? And I think there is a certain amount of dramatic license allowed on occasions like this. Now, if you take the case of John Major, the former Prime Minister, and he's denounced this scene involving him as a barrel load of malicious nonsense, I think that was the phrase. Of course we accept that. He's a former Prime Minister. We expect him to tell the truth. Of course it didn't happen, because abdication, the A word, is a big taboo in the royal family. The abdication of the Queen's beloved uncle David, Edward VIII, on the 10th of December 1936, that was blamed by the royal family for causing a lot of trouble for them because it made the Queen heir apparent, and the Queen Mother, she always blamed the early death of her husband, King George VI, on the fact that he had to take over from his brother. So there was never any occasion, and Prince Charles would have known this, there was no possibility of the Queen abdicating, because when she was crowned in 1953, she didn't make her vow to a government or all the people of this country. She made her vow to God to be Queen. And she did to her dying breath. She was the Queen of this country, as we saw until her last day on the 8th of September this year.
Absolutely. As I understand it, and I'm keen to know whether or not you agree, there are three immediate problems facing the royal family, aren't there? There's the crown depicting the 90s, which, as you've just eloquently set out, were not a great decade for the royal family. You've got the prince, who's going to pay for Prince Andrew now Her Late Majesty is gone? And you've got Harry's memoir as well. That's coming out later on.
Darren, that book, which is called Spare, is going to be a very unwelcome late Christmas present. It's going to be published on January the 10th, I believe. Get your orders in now. That will not be favourite reading at Clarence House or Buckingham Palace. Every chapter will be a headline, and the headlines will write themselves, because even if he's toned it down, as reports have said he has done, there is bound to be tremendous criticism, because he feels very slighted. I mean, he will not spare us, if you will excuse the pun, which is entirely intended. He will not spare us his anger, his ire, and his resentment that he feels that his wife was unfairly treated, was maligned in some way, which caused them to leave this country. And he believes that he knows who caused it all. Now, I think that the book would be an absolute damp squib if it didn't go into those areas. I mean, apparently the publisher, which is Penguin Random House, have paid an enormous sum of money. I mean, a tremendous sum, $17 million US. It must be the greatest advance ever. Well, they'll be expecting a bit of a bang for their buck. So if Harry pulls his punches, I think they will become a laughingstock, because people will say it, they'll buy it, and they'll say, well, here's the sandwich, where's the meat?
So, Michael, then, on that point about Prince Andrew, Duke of York, where do you think he stands now?
Well, he is also in a very difficult position. I mean, he's a semi-detached member of the royal family. Well, I think he's sort of at a cottage in the country. In fact, he's at Royal Lodge, the Queen Mother's old residence in Windsor Great Park. But he is a potential embarrassment, because there is a problem, because earlier this year, we will remember that he paid damages of £12 million to Mrs. Virginia Giuffre to settle a civil case in New York. Now, Prince Andrew said he never met Mrs. Giuffre when she was a 17-year-old Virginia Roberts, and he says he never had sex with her. He didn't know the woman. He never met her. Well, he gave her £12 million in damages. Now, Mrs. Giuffre is involved with at least two other cases which may come to court in 2023. And the way these things go, he cannot be sure that he will escape the spotlight, that his name will not be mentioned again. These are all very fraught and difficult times, so there's a lot to be apprehensive about.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's going to be an interesting year, I think it's safe to say, for the new king and the whole of the royal family. But no doubt we'll have you back, Michael, and you'll be able to take us through all of it. That was the former BBC correspondent Michael Cole there with his fantastic analysis.